Great motion design starts with great storyboards. And by the end of this video, you'll know 5 ways to make yours even better. Now, the purpose of a storyboard is to communicate on paper or on pixels what is going to happen on screen to anybody involved in the production. With a personal project, you might be the only one who sees them, but in a larger team, there might be dozens of artists working that you need to communicate these ideas to. And of course, the client. And I'm going to break down 5 important parts of the process using examples from my What is Goon personal project. And thank you to Millernote for sponsoring this video. Millernote is an amazing web app that allows you to organize your projects from the start to the end on interactive visual boards with a simple drag and drop interface. It's so useful in the pre-production phase for collecting research and reference for your motion design projects, and they have got wonderful storyboarding tools. So you can choose from a bunch of templates to get started, and there's lots of variety depending on how you like to set up your boards. Of course, you can customize them to your heart's content, and updating frames is incredibly simple. But the wild ride of creative project planning and pre-production doesn't stop there. Millernote's built-in commenting, sharing, and notifications make collaboration easy. You're in total control of who can edit, comment, and give feedback on your boards. You can also share a link to any board with no sign-up required to view, and download high-quality printable PDFs of any board. Millernote is definitely a tool I love to use. Now, the first is to work in passes. Now, this might seem obvious to a lot of you, but I don't see this nearly enough. And there are 3 main passes that I like to work in the storyboarding process. There's the thumbnail, the board, and then the style frame. So the thumbnail is where you're really rough. You're just getting your ideas out of your head onto the paper. You've got your script beside you and you're working out how to just visualize that on the screen. Now, you might be the only one that needs to understand these. You are not showing these to the client. You're maybe showing them to someone else internally in your team, but these really are just for you. Then we've got the boards, or as you might call them, your storyboards, your sketches, your panel, whatever you like. These are essentially your refined thumbnails to sort of get ready to show your client and really start to actually communicate what you're thinking in your head so other people can understand it. And then we've got the style frame, or the final design, and this should essentially be what it would be like to pause your animation. And you might consider this design phase not part of the storyboarding phase, and that's fair enough, but the edges of these processes in the pre-production do tend to get very blurry around the edges. You've probably already designed some style frames before storyboarding. Maybe even some animation tests have been done. And I think it's good to see where a thumbnail can progress to. Too many times I see people jumping into the final design before thumbnailing or before even making any boards at all. And you can have more passes if you like. You might have an intermediate phase between thumbnail and board where you tighten it up a little bit, or you might have to deliver full color storyboards depending on what the project is you're working on, and we're going to get into some of the details in that later. And number 2 is to start on paper. I think the best way to start thumbnailing is with the pen and pencil. And the biggest reason I like it is because it limits you. It's important to think of the first thumbnail pass as a draft. That's it. It'll never be anything more than that. You should be thinking about story, structure, pacing, and composition, not the design details. That's already enough to hold in your head at one time, let alone thinking about how specific things will look in the final animation. That's for you to deal with later. Now, some people like to print out templates with rectangles on them to speed up the process. And I find the one thing that I do use occasionally is post-it notes. And that's because you can reshuffle them really easily. You can move shots, you can move ideas, and that just keeps everything fluid out in front of you. Because otherwise, I start to add a bit too many arrows that kind of confuse the situation. And then when we're done with thumbnailing on paper, we bring them into the computer and reunite with our good old friend, Control-Z. And of course, we're going to drag these into Millernote. And what I particularly love about Millernote is just how easy it is to drag and move things around so you can get a better idea of where they are visually. I don't know if you've ever used like a slide software or something to make your storyboards, and you normally have about 4 panels to a screen. If you want to put something in between panels 2 and 3, you've got to move forward to the next page and move 3 along, and then you've got to reshuffle every single panel that comes after that, and it is a nightmare. So being able to drag and drop and move things easily is a feature I refuse to live without. And number 3 is to experiment. Storyboarding is where the biggest decisions of a project happen. So you should take advantage of that, and also it is where it is cheapest to make mistakes as well. Say you thumbnail a sequence and then you realize, well, this isn't going to work. You can just re-thumbnail it and it might take another 2 minutes. Whereas if you find out that it doesn't work in animation because you haven't really storyboarded, you just went straight into After Effects, you're going to animate it and figure out that it doesn't work, then you might have to spend hours or days finding a better solution. So I think it's best to challenge yourself in the thumbnail phase to create alternatives. So here are the first 2 thumbnails of my Goon animation. Here's what the final looks like.
What is Goon? This modest cask wine is an Australian icon.
So we're transitioning from A to B, where it says the modest cask wine is an Australian icon. So we've got the wine, and then we've got the Australian coat of arms. Now in the final animation, the cask did a bit of a bounce, it jumps up and then gets caught by the emu and the kangaroo, and all the details of the vine sort of spread out from there. But what if we went back in time and try to come up with some other examples of what this might look like? So let's make a copy of this, and let's add some different thumbnails for the transition in between. So here, let's consider, instead of bouncing up, it starts rotating. So we start anticipating, it rotates a bit to the left, and then shoots around, rotating clockwise. Grapes go flying, wine goes flying, and then it finishes a 360 rotation as the kangaroo and the emu pop out. And then the vines and the details appear down below. That could work. Let's try another option. Let's copy that again. And here we've got it doing a 3D rotation, rotating on the third axis. So it starts to rotate here, the grapes come to the front, and then as it reaches 180, the kangaroo starts to come from behind, and then it flips and it kind of reveals the kangaroo and the coat of arms in that way. Now already from thumbnailing, I know that this probably isn't going to work in production, because animating a 3D kangaroo is going to be tricky. Even thumbnailing it, I couldn't bring myself to animate a kangaroo facing away from me foreshortened, so that probably won't work in 3D. But we've tried some options, and it only took a few minutes to draw. Your options might be better, they might not, but it's really easy to trial them in this scenario, and also really encourage you to try to put as much space, as much time between different sessions as you can. Ideally, sleeping on it is the best thing to do, and then you come back to your thumbnails the next day, and you're going to think of different ideas, because you'll have a very slightly different perspective. So sleep more, sleep at work if you can. And if you're finding these tips and discussion useful, please give this video a like. It really does help me and the channel keep growing so that I can keep providing these videos every week. And consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any of the new ones. And number 4 is to be detailed. I use my storyboards to walk the client through the process and through the final animation as much as possible. After the thumbnail phase, you've got the structure, you've got the pace. I like to make the actual boards, the final sketches in a black and white line form as close to the final design as I can. Now for some styles that will be harder, so try to use your judgment on how much time is best spending in the storyboard phase versus the design phase. But I'm going to give you my argument as to why you should spend that on this phase, on the storyboarding phase. So let's focus on this one board that I have of Captain James Goon over here. And I'm going to drag in my final design. And you can see they are close. They are really close. There's a few subtle things that I've changed, like the design of the frame, and I've simplified the background. I've removed the previous scene from that, but all the shapes are pretty much identical. Now, the main reason you would do this is to try to keep your client on the same page. Now, I could have easily simplified this as when I showed them as a storyboard. I could have just shown a stick figure, but the client might see the stick figure and it's unlikely that they're going to assume that the stick figure will be in the final animation, that this is going to be a stick figure animation. And if they think that, that's very easy to resolve, because you can say, no, it'll look better. But the worst thing that they can do is project an idea of what a human will look like before you've given them some options. So when I show them a stick figure, they will understand, oh, this is a placeholder, it's going to get developed further and be in this sort of style. And then when I go away and do my designs and show them this lovely colored illustration of Stanley James Goon, they might think, that's not what I had in my head, because they would have gotten slightly attached to whatever loose ideas they had of how humans might look in this animation. And of course, a way to mediate this is to get more style frames approved before you go into the storyboarding and the final design process. But at some point, you will have to show them final designs for your scenes. And the closer they are to what they've seen before, it's closer to what they are going to expect, and they are more likely to approve them and less likely to make you go and make lots of changes. Now, of course, there will be changes, there will be feedback, and there is a risk to spending more time upfront in the storyboarding phase. And that risk is that if they don't like them at the storyboarding phase, you might have lost time or wasted time developing them. But I don't think that's true, because if I presented this storyboard of Stanley James Goon here and the client didn't like it, or it didn't work for whatever reason, they're going to tell me that, and that's going to be brought up then. And it is much, much easier to change a black and white line drawing than it is to change a full colored illustration, or worse, 2 days worth of animation. So the risk to reward ratio is far more in favor of spending more time up front, and especially in the storyboarding phase here. And I want to show you some other examples of some really detailed full color storyboards. So these are some that I found just by searching commercial illustration into Google. And let's take a look at this one on the left. So this is for a live action commercial. Starts off with a lovely establishing shot here, a beautiful vista, then a man chopping up some white cubes, possibly feta, possibly sugar cubes, who knows? And then here, his watermelon turns into a real boy, and then the whole family celebrates by eating the white chunks out of the watermelon. A beautiful story, one for the ages. But these frames are so detailed. So much work went into making these. And this isn't even going to be animated. So Why did so much effort go into these? Money. Money is the main reason. So for commercial projects, for live action shoots, they are pretty expensive. So the contract for a commercial shot like this might be $100,000 thereabouts. So to win that contract, it's worth the investment to spend a couple of $1,000s getting these storyboards made from the ad agency. So they hopefully win that pitch. And these storyboards are less instructive for the director and the cinematographer. These are more to make the client feel like they're in safe hands, that the ad is going to look beautiful, and there will be lots of happy emotions as the character, consumes the feta cheese. These ones from Disney, from Lilo and Stitch, are also pretty detailed, but they are more focused on the character and the emotion. And that is because these are more to communicate to the animators what the character's emotions are feeling. These aren't going to be shown to the shareholders to say, hey, please approve these. How do you like the look of Stitch's face? These are more of a tool to communicate further down the pipeline to the animators. And another example is how you can be really loose with them if that's what you need. So this is from the movie Knives Out, and I think Rian Johnson even drew this himself. And for here, there doesn't need to be a full color, beautiful illustration. This communicates everything it needs to for him and for his team, and there's no client that needs to approve this or anything beyond himself. So if you're making something for yourself, you can be a little bit looser, and I'm going to show more of that in the next point, which is be descriptive. And this is for pretty much the same reasons as the previous point. This is about creating a clearer path for your client to the final animation. As animators, motion designers, we understand the process and we can imagine what something will look like when it's finished based on this. But all that is in our head, and it's all about getting that out of our head and into the client's head so they know what to expect and will love and praise you forever. So this What is Goom project was a personal project. I was the only one designing, the only one animating, and I wrote the script as well. So there was no client. The only person I had to answer to was myself. So having different visions for what the project is going to be isn't an issue. So for this shot, I only did one storyboard. And we have the VO, Goom was invented on the first fleet, and the description is the ship falls, making a large splash in the ocean, bottles of wine and the skull emerge from the water.
The idea was born on the First Fleet by Sir Stanley James Goom.
But here's how I would present these storyboards if I was presenting them to a client. Let's make a copy of this, and first let's add some more frames. There, we've added 5 new panels, and let's give it a bit more of a flavorful description. The ocean is calm, a ship falls rapidly from the sky, it causes a huge splash as it plunges into the water, it settles on the surface, wine bottles on a skull emerge slowly up from the ocean. Now this is way more descriptive, and a client is going to know exactly what we intend to happen from reading these and looking at the frames. And these frames didn't take me that much longer to make, even though there's 6 frames compared to 1. The ship was copy and pasted into all of the frames. The first 2, I just drew some lines. This one has a splash, and we've just got one more frame of it settling down and another of the bottles coming up. Barely any time at all. And this paints such a more vivid image in the client's mind that they are going to know exactly what I intended. And of course, this isn't just for the client as well. This is for the other animators and the other designers if you're working in a team. If you're storyboarding something, you're probably not going to be the same person that designs these scenes or animates these scenes. If you are in a larger team, that is. If it's just a personal project, you're stuck with all the hard work. But this makes it much easier down the pipeline. Now, again, this is slightly more work upfront, but it is much better to find out if this doesn't work from your client at this phase than them approving these storyboards on the left and then you animating it and the client saying, whoa, this splash is all wrong. I thought the ship was going to come in from the side, and they make you reanimate it. You want to avoid that at all costs. So that's how I board things differently for a personal and a client project. But the more experience I do get, the more I tend to put more effort into these storyboards because I find it helps me even more than it does the client sometimes. And when you do want to share with your client in Millinode, you can just always export this as a PDF or a PNG, or even better, you can share this board with them and they can go and make their own comments and give praise to particular scenes. And one of the most important things to do is actually just talk to your client while they're looking at the storyboards. Do that over the phone. Don't just rely on email. The phone is a lot less scary than you think. Thank you to Millinode for sponsoring this video. If you'd like to learn animation and motion design techniques, I've got a playlist of some of the best tutorials on this channel for you to take a look at. I'll see you in the next one.